August 1943. The skies over Europe had become a battleground like no other. The Luftwaffe, once feared and respected, was struggling to maintain its dominance. The Allies were growing bolder, their planes faster, their tactics more daring. Among the many voices of concern rising in the German high command, one stood out, a man whose reputation as a fighter ace was second to none. Adolf Galland, a seasoned veteran of the Luftwaffe, had witnessed firsthand the changes in aerial warfare. He had seen the successes and the failures, the triumphs and the tragedies, and he understood more clearly than most that the balance of power in the air was shifting. Galland had flown countless missions over Europe, chasing Spitfires, engaging in dogfights with American P-37 Thunderbolts, and trying to keep pace with the innovations coming from across the Atlantic. By mid-1943, the Luftwaffe's intelligence had begun to pick up reports of a new type of American aircraft, a long-range fighter, capable of escorting bombers deep into Germany. At first, these reports seemed almost fantastical. How could a single fighter cover such distances without refueling, and still carry enough firepower to engage the Luftwaffe on its own territory? Galland was skeptical at first, as were many others. The Luftwaffe had grown accustomed to underestimating the enemy, confident in their training, their tactics, and the proven capabilities of German engineering. But the reports persisted. Pilots returning from missions over England and North Africa spoke of a twin-engine fighter that was fast, heavily armed, and unusually tough. It could dive with incredible speed, turn sharply, and outrun the Messerschmitts in some situations. Most concerning of all, it could fly alongside Allied bombers all the way to the heart of Germany, something that no American fighter had managed before. Galland knew he had to act. He needed to alert the top brass, and he knew exactly whom to speak to: Hermann Göring, the commander-in-chief of the Luftwaffe. Göring was a complex figure, charismatic, ambitious, and fiercely loyal to the idea of German superiority in the air. But he also had a tendency to dismiss anything that seemed inconvenient or threatening to his worldview. Previous warnings about enemy innovations had often been met with skepticism, and Galland feared that this message might meet the same fate. Still, he pressed forward. In early August 1943, Galland secured an audience with Göring. The tension in the room was palpable. Galland, ever disciplined and precise, outlined the threat in stark terms. He described the long-range capabilities of the new American fighter, its speed, its armament, and the devastating effect it could have on German bomber defences. He spoke with the authority of someone who had lived through the air battles over Britain, France, and the Eastern Front. He painted a picture of vulnerability, a German Reich suddenly exposed to enemy aircraft, deep within its borders, unable to intercept them effectively because their fighters simply could not reach them in time. Göring listened, but his reaction was anything but the urgency Galland expected. According to accounts from that meeting, Göring waved off the warnings with a mix of disbelief and irritation. "Impossible," he reportedly said. The idea that American engineers could produce a fighter capable of escorting bombers on missions of hundreds of miles and still remain effective in combat seemed absurd to him. To Göring, German aviation was still superior, and the thought that the enemy could challenge that dominance on German soil was, in his mind, an exaggeration or an error in intelligence. Galland, however, was not easily dismissed. He pressed on, emphasizing the potential consequences if the Luftwaffe failed to adapt. He warned of escalating bomber losses, the erosion of morale among German pilots, and the strategic implications of allowing the Allies strike industrial centers with impunity. The meeting, as told by those who were present, was a clash of reality versus pride, evidence versus denial. Galland spoke calmly but firmly, laying out reports, intelligence briefings, and pilot testimonies. Yet Göring's response remained unwavering. He refused to believe that such an aircraft could exist or pose a real threat. Behind the scenes, however, Galland knew the stakes were higher than ever. The Allies were steadily increasing their bombing campaigns, pushing deeper into German territory, and the Luftwaffe's resources were stretched thin. Every sortie carried the risk of losing experienced pilots, and replacements were increasingly scarce. The emergence of a long-range escort fighter threatened to nullify one of Germany's remaining advantages. the ability to intercept and disrupt Allied bombing missions before they reached critical targets. Galland's warning was not merely a tactical observation, it was a glimpse into the future of aerial warfare. He understood that the conflict was evolving, that technology was shifting the balance, and that Germany could no longer rely solely on speed, numbers, or pilot skill to maintain air superiority. Yet, as history would show, his insights were initially dismissed, delayed, and underestimated, setting the stage for one of the most consequential challenges the Luftwaffe would face in the final years of the war. As August 1943 rolled on, the reality of what Adolf Galland had warned about began to crystallize. Reports from Luftwaffe pilots became increasingly alarming. Encounters over the skies of Europe were no longer simple skirmishes. They were evolving into something far more dangerous. The Americans had begun deploying their new twin-engine fighter in significant numbers, the Lockheed P-38 Lightning. And unlike anything the Germans had faced before, these aircraft could escort bombers on missions deep into enemy territory, striking fear into the heart of the term. Luftwaffe. The P-38 was unlike traditional fighters. Its sleek twin-boom design was immediately recognizable, and its long range made it a revolutionary tool in aerial warfare. Whereas German fighters were limited by fuel and operational range, the P-38 could accompany bombers all the way to targets in the Ruhr and Berlin. Pilots reported that the aircraft could dive with incredible speed, maneuver with surprising agility for its size, and return fire with concentrated accuracy. Its twin engines gave it resilience. Even if one was damaged in combat, the aircraft could limp back to base. For the Luftwaffe, this meant that the days of striking Allied bombers with relative impunity were coming to an end. Galland understood the implications instantly. The Luftwaffe had been confident in its strategies for defending the Reich. Intercept formations were planned with calculated precision, pilots trained to exploit speed, altitude, and firepower advantages. But the P-38s threatened to undermine all of that. They could stay with the bombers, absorb damage, and fight back fiercely against German interceptors. It was a scenario the Luftwaffe had not prepared for, and Galland realized that without adaptation, German pilots would be walking into a nightmare. He began coordinating with other senior commanders, trying to devise countermeasures. Some suggested deploying more Messerschmitt Bf 109 seconds or the formidable Focke-Wulf 190 seconds in greater numbers. Others argued for new tactics, hit-and-run attacks, high-altitude interceptions, or concentrating on targeting the bombers' formations rather than engaging the escorts. But each plan carried risk. The Luftwaffe was already stretched thin. Experienced pilots were in short supply. Aircraft production had been disrupted by Allied bombing, and morale was beginning to waver. Galland knew that time was a luxury they did not have. Meanwhile, intelligence reports confirmed what Galland had feared. P-38 seconds were not only fast and heavily armed, they were also remarkably durable. Their presence forced German pilots to fly defensively, often allowing bombers to reach their targets with fewer losses than before. The Americans were learning from each engagement, refining tactics, and steadily increasing the pressure on Germany's defences. Each sortie revealed weaknesses in the Luftwaffe's planning, weaknesses that could have been mitigated had the warnings been taken seriously earlier. Galland himself took to the skies whenever possible, flying combat missions to understand the full scope of the threat. He witnessed firsthand the devastating efficiency of the P-38 seconds. Pilots reported being pursued relentlessly across long stretches of sky, often exhausted by the end of the engagement. The Luftwaffe's traditional advantage, quick, decisive strikes, was being neutralized. The P-38 seconds could endure punishment, maintain formation with bombers, and respond to attacks with deadly precision. In short, the German air strategy was being forced into obsolescence before the eyes of its most experienced pilots. Yet, while Galland's superiors were gradually beginning to grasp the severity of the threat, Göring's earlier dismissal of the warnings had already cost critical months. The Luftwaffe could have adapted, revised tactics, or prioritized aircraft production to counter the new fighters. Instead, overconfidence and denial had slowed their response. Galland, frustrated but undeterred, continued to press the issue, emphasizing the need for immediate action and strategic adjustments. He knew that the lives of German pilots, the effectiveness of their missions, and the security of the Reich depended on recognizing the reality in front of them. The P-38 Lightning also introduced psychological warfare into the conflict. German pilots, many of whom had become accustomed to dominating the skies over Europe, were suddenly confronted by a plane that could match them in speed, firepower, and endurance. Fear and uncertainty began to creep into the ranks. Experienced pilots were being tested like never before, facing an enemy that refused to retreat, that could strike deep within German territory, and that forced engagements on terms that the Luftwaffe had not anticipated. Galland's warnings had not been exaggerated, they were prophetic. Beyond the tactical and strategic implications, the P-38 represented a broader shift in the war itself. The Allies were no longer just relying on mass bombings, they were combining technological innovation, long-range capabilities, and precise tactics to steadily erode Germany's advantage. For Galland, it was a painful realization. The air war had entered a new phase, one in which German dominance could no longer be assumed, and in which failure to adapt quickly could have catastrophic consequences. Every mission flown by the Luftwaffe now carried heightened stakes. Every encounter with the P-38 was a test of skill, nerve, and survival. Galland watched as young pilots faced near impossible odds, often paying the ultimate price. Yet, despite the mounting losses, he continued to push for changes, tactical revisions, aircraft upgrades, and better intelligence dissemination. His persistence, even in the face of bureaucratic resistance and the lingering disbelief of senior leaders, underscored his understanding of the pivotal moment in the air war. By late 1943, the P-38s had begun to establish their reputation across Europe. The aircraft was a symbol of the Allies' growing dominance and a constant reminder of the Luftwaffe's vulnerability. Galland, ever vigilant, recognized the significance not only in immediate tactical terms, but in its broader strategic impact. Each unchallenged bomber mission struck industrial centers, disrupted supply lines, and weakened Germany's ability to sustain the war effort. The stakes were no longer theoretical, they were painfully real. By the winter of 1943, the warnings Adolf Galland had delivered months earlier had become undeniable reality. The Luftwaffe was under relentless pressure, and the P-38 Lightnings had transformed the air war over Europe. What had seemed impossible to Hermann Göring was now happening with devastating effect. German pilots were losing the edge they had relied on for years, and the consequences rippled across every level of command. Galland had predicted that long-range escort fighters would change the game, and he was proven correct. The P-38s were no longer just an occasional threat. They were a permanent fixture in the skies, accompanying heavy bombers, intercepting German fighters, and forcing the Luftwaffe to adapt in ways that came far too late. German formations, once confident and precise, were now frequently disrupted. Pilots who had survived countless engagements over Britain and the Eastern Front suddenly faced opponents who could match them in speed, outgun them, and remain in combat far longer than expected. The margin for error had vanished. The psychological toll was enormous. Galland, despite his experience and composure, could see the fear creeping into the ranks of even the most seasoned pilots. Young aviators, many of whom were still learning the harsh lessons of air combat, were facing a threat that the High Command had underestimated. The very confidence that had allowed the Luftwaffe to dominate in earlier years was eroding. Galland himself continued to lead by example, flying combat missions, studying tactics, and offering guidance wherever possible. But the bureaucracy, the pride, and the denial at the top, most notably Göring, had cost valuable time that could never be recovered. As missions intensified, the Luftwaffe scrambled to counter the P-38's unique capabilities. New tactics were devised, high-speed intercepts were attempted, and concentrated efforts were made to disrupt bomber formations before the escorts arrived. Yet, the P-38 pilots were skilled, disciplined, and increasingly experienced in defending the bombers. Each engagement highlighted the gap between German assumptions and Allied reality. Galland's earlier warnings had captured the essence of the threat, but implementation lagged, and the Luftwaffe paid a steep price. The P-38 also symbolized a turning point in the technological arms race of the skies. While Germany had developed formidable aircraft, they were designed for a different kind of combat, short-range, tactical superiority, rapid engagements. The Americans had created a fighter that combined endurance, firepower, and versatility in a way that challenged everything the Luftwaffe thought it knew. Galland, as ever, understood that war was evolving. Technology could not be ignored, and denial could be fatal. Every day, the skies over Germany reminded him of the danger he had foreseen. For Göring and the Luftwaffe leadership, the consequences were as much political as they were military. Losses mounted, morale faltered, and questions began to emerge about the command's ability to respond effectively. Yet, even as evidence mounted, some continued to cling to outdated assumptions. Galland's frustration grew. He had seen the threat clearly, had voiced the warning with urgency, and had even risked his own career to speak truth to power. And still, the disbelief he had encountered months earlier lingered, a stark reminder of the gap between insight and authority, foresight and bureaucracy. The war continued to escalate, and the P-38 became a regular fixture in the skies above Germany. Pilots encountered them on nearly every mission. The once dominant Luftwaffe faced attrition at a pace that could not be sustained. Factories, fuel depots, and transport hubs were increasingly vulnerable to the combined assault of long-range bombers and their lightning-fast escorts. Galland's foresight had not stopped the devastation, but it highlighted a crucial lesson. Ignoring emerging threats in warfare can have catastrophic consequences, no matter how improbable they may seem. Looking back, Adolf Galland's August 1943 warning stands as a testament to his skill, experience, and clarity of vision. He understood the nature of the P-38 threat when others could not or would not see it. He combined first-hand knowledge with keen strategic insight, and he communicated the dangers with urgency and precision. History would prove him right. The Luftwaffe's inability to act decisively in response to the long-range fighters accelerated the decline of Germany's air superiority and contributed to the eventual success of Allied strategic bombing campaigns. Galland's story also serves as a lesson in the human dimensions of warfare. Pride, denial, and bureaucracy can blind even the most powerful leaders to reality. Evidence, expertise, and experience, no matter how compelling, may go unheeded. In the skies above Europe, German pilots fought bravely, but they were increasingly confronting a reality that had been predicted and warned about, yet underestimated. The P-38 Lightning had changed the game, and the Luftwaffe's struggles were a stark illustration of what happens when foresight meets disbelief. In the end, Adolf Galland remained a symbol of courage, intelligence, and persistence. He had seen the threat, understood its implications, and warned those in power. While his warnings could not stop the tide of history, they reveal a critical moment where knowledge clashed with hubris, where truth met skepticism, and where the future of aerial warfare was irreversibly altered. The skies of 1943 were no longer a playground for German dominance. They were a proving ground for innovation, endurance, and adaptability. And through it all, Galland's voice stands out, a reminder that even the most impossible threats can become reality when the winds of change take flight.